I think it's one of the cultural myths that we feed our children, that marks will get you admission into colleges. The reality is that there's a combination of factors that actually goes with hard work, that goes to get you the marks. And because we feed them this, children sort of believe, and then they start to have a self-image. Oh, I didn't work hard enough. I should have worked harder. I shouldn't have done this. I should have done that. And it leads to so much of, self-analysis, unnecessarily so. And of course, also the question begs to be answered is, what is success?
This is Dr. Rani Koshi, a pedagogue, a principal, and a pioneer in the field of inclusive education. Following her visionary mother, Miss Sarah Matthew, Dr. Rani Koshi heads St. Mary's School, popularly known as a school with a heart.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm introducing and interviewing Dr. Annie Koshi, principal of St. Mary's School, Saptajing Enclave. I thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity and taking out this valuable time for the interview. I thank you very, very much for that.
Okay, Mary.
St. Mary's has been recognized for its work. It does, and I thought it would help having a principal's perspective to the blog that I write. And I've been doing inclusive practices writing about inclusive practices on the blog. So I wanted your views on this, and I also thought it is crucial to have inclusivity in more schools. So my first question to you is, St. Mary's was started by Sarah ma'am, your mother, and how do you think the school continues to carry forth the vision of hers even today?
How do you think, Echa? Now, as far as visions are concerned, if a vision is reasonably planted into people, then the chances of it going on, I think, are strong. One. Two is, if a vision has some meaning and is implementable, then of course also the vision can go on, So I think in that case, both what was the vision and the fact that it's something that could be practiced was one of the reasons that this vision has been carried on.
Why do you think St. Mary's stands out in the field of inclusive education? How do you, as a principal, as a teacher, as well as an administrator, interpret the word inclusive?
Okay, why does St. Mary's School stand out? I think really there are very few schools practicing inclusion. The very idea of inclusion, first of all, is yet to be understood in its totality. There is no one model to inclusion. There are many variations possible, but inclusion, that is of including excluded into the regular classroom, is not easy to do. Definitely not easy to do when you want to achieve very high marks. And so consequently it was not practiced. I mean, we as Indians have largely been academic oriented. So of course the admission test is only looking for the fact that it's a time written examination means that you start to weed out those who can't write, those who can't read, those who can't sort of answer your mathematics table. So we are so caught up in the marks of the board examination that from the beginning we try to weed out those who cannot do it. So why are we known so well? Because perhaps we were the few schools who were doing it. That's why we are known so well. That's my point. And your second question was that
as a teacher, as an administrator, how do you take the word?
How do you interpret the word inclusion? So, words that are connected with the world of disability or the world of challenges, there are so many words like typical, atypical that is there. But in that world and in the world of education vis-a-vis disability, there is something called segregation, integration and inclusion. All these words are on the same spectrum really, but segregation is when you have different classrooms for the children. So if a challenged child is there, they're in a different classroom, maybe in a different setup totally. So you have schools for the blind, you have schools for the hearing impaired, like that. Nowadays there are schools that have within their own school different classrooms, so they follow some kind of segregation. Integration is when children may step out of the regular class for some classes, for a one-to-one and all that, but come back to the regular class maybe for a music period or an art period kind of thing. Inclusion is when actually the child is in the class through the day and the teacher and the peer help in adapting the curriculum according to their levels. Assessment practices are changed to accommodate, a variety of say methods of delivery, like you may have a project presentation or an oral one, or you don't have to have a time for it. You may give him extra time, you may give him a writer. So there are varieties of ways in which you may assess a child. So an inclusive class school would look at both pedagogy as well as assessment and make sure that these both are adjusted in order to make it inclusive. So it's something that's doable. Definitely, as you said right in the beginning, any education worth its salt should be an inclusive education.
Absolutely.
And it's possible to do. Since we've done it, we know it's possible. It's not easy, but education definitely, the world of education itself is not an easy job. Teachers are very hardworking people, and I'm sure will be able to manage if they can.
Okay. Dealing with an inclusive setup requires your teachers to be empowered and equipped to manage such diversity. How does the school create space of learning for teachers themselves in order to empower them?
Well, an inclusive setup actually gives you opportunities for learning. So when you have in your class a child, say, who's visually challenged, the teacher herself has to adapt her techniques to suit the child.
Absolutely.
So, I don't have to give you a workshop on that. You come trained with many methods from a B.Ed class or a B.L.Ed or a primary teacher's Montessori training. Now, you have a child who cannot see. You have to make her learn. You will find a method to the whole thing. So, all I'm doing is actually giving you opportunities to learn. Now, that's one way of teaching you, to actually do an immersion method, or you can have a separate workshop, which is also what we do. So, you approach it from a variety of angles. So, you can do an immersion, or you can do something that is like a separate workshop. So, we call in people from the Spastic Society, or we call in people from ADI, not Spastic Society, ADI is the same, or from Action for Autism, or from NAB, to have workshops with our teachers to get them to learn. But more than anything else, the workshop that is most needed is that about changing attitudes. If I have the right attitude, then I can be successful in what I want to do. So that is that main thing.
How does one translate vision into actual physical infrastructure of a school? How has St. Mary's tried to make the most basic facility available to its diverse quality of students as a part of the inclusive system?
So one thing is that inclusion is about including the excluded. One. To do that, you have to actually start to look at what are your exclusionary practices. So if you look at it, for instance, when a child enters the school, in most schools you have steps. If you have two buildings, two stories, then you have steps leading up to the stories. The minute a child is on a wheelchair or is a crawler, she'll have to crawl up the steps. In fact, when we had the first child, who was a crawler from the Spastic Society of India, children would carry the child up in his wheelchair on the steps. So we'd always say, can we have some strong boys from this class? And 4 boys would come and then they'd pick up the child and take him up the steps and bring him down the steps and all that. From there to say that we would have a lift was a very simple step. So, we made a ramp and we made lifts. So, even though there are steps, there is a ramp to circumvent that whole thing. Next thing is fees. The minute you have high fees, you exclude those who cannot pay. So, you start to do free ships, or you say you are coming from a certain economic strata, let us remove the fees for you. So, that way you include the financially excluded. If you have, so in terms of teaching practices, so as I am saying that if you have a visually challenged child in your class and you do a PowerPoint presentation, it is not of a great quality education. So, you are trying to give equal quality education. So, what is equal quality? I mean, it is quality education for the sighted. For the non-sighted, a PowerPoint presentation is not an equal quality education. So, then what you would do is, how will I present that a little differently? So, teaching practices change to accommodate. You do not try to get them to fit into what you are doing, but you change to fit the child. Okay? Then the most important is assessment practices. Assessment practices, so if you are doing what is popular even with the CBSE, which is a timed written exam, children who can't write, the CBSE themselves will give you a writer, will give you extra time, now allows a computer also for them. So, those are all things that can be introduced by the school itself from an early class. Some children are pacing behind the class, so you can give them a examination paper that tests their area. Some children are with the class, but are not able to take a large portion, so then you give another kind of paper there. So, basically you change again assessment practices. If someone is not a writer at all, I know the answer and I can speak it out, then okay, so give me an oral answer then paper to you. So, you can do many kinds of ways. Again, as I said about attitudes, the only thing is that I should want to include them. Then I will adjust what is necessary.
Absolutely.
I would also like to say at this juncture that bringing in parents,
Yes.
is such an important thing. So, it is not just important that you change certain practices that I have mentioned. Pulling in your students, are they caring, are they empathetic and understanding of their peers is very important. Are the teachers recognizing that this is a rights based education? You are doing me no favors, it is not a charity model, it is a rights based model. Okay, so the right to education gives every child an equal quality education. So, then you will make sure that your parents are pulled in, the community is pulled in, the students are pulled in, the teachers are pulled in. So, an inclusive school is one where everyone is within the framework, understands the vision, is actually owning the vision, then you are successful. It is never a point that you reach, because you never reach it, it's always sort of moving, and you have to constantly work to make sure that you are on track.
What further additions to the school learning space would enhance the level of inclusivity you already have? For example, I am talking of learning centers. Do you think such a defined space will be beneficial?
This is a very interesting question, because when we first started off this whole idea of inclusion,
I have intentionally put this.
We as a school did not have any special educators, and we would want that our teachers were the ones who would actually present. And because even counselors we did not have, because we would say that the teacher is the counselor, the teacher is the one that deals with every child. And the minute you have these, then you start to say, go out, she will look after, go out, she has to be counseled. So, you sort of are only sitting there to teach, and somebody else is doing something else. The teacher is the guide, the sage, and everything, out there. So, that was what was once upon a time in education. Slowly I found that as the numbers of special needs children increased in the class, then we needed somebody to advise the teacher. So, even now in our school, when we have special ed, we only have 2 of them. When we have them, What we do is the teachers, the special educator's job is to step into class to see what the issues are and then advise the teacher and the peers on how to tackle it rather than take the child out and look after the child. Right? So, learning center, I feel that is, sending the child out, that's not something that we have practiced so far. I don't think that's what we want to practice either. But definitely I would like parents to come in to help look after some children, because then it's actually, this whole inclusion is about owning up to the fact that there is diversity in the society, there's diversity in the family. Can we sort of carry with us people who are not what we think they should be, is the question,
Who and what are some of your inspirations, people you look up to as pioneers in this field, as thinkers, as teachers, or even simply as human beings?
The parents of special needs children are really, some of them have been inspirational. I have to say, when I think of Tanya Sachdev, for instance, who was in our school long ago, or even Komal, who's our first student actually. Komal, the way he achieves what he has achieved, he's passed out of the school, did very well. I think was the first child with challenges at St. Stephen's, passed out with a graduation, in mathematics, looks after a petrol pump, lives on his own and with an assistant, of course, but is definitely making a success of his life. Tanya Sachdev's mother, Anita, for instance, was somebody who would constantly come and push not just the child, but the questions the teachers.
I was one.
You were one of them.
First one.
Yeah. So,
Class 2.
because Anita was wanting her daughter to do as much as she could, very understanding, trained herself and all, but her questions, always done very gently and very well, made the school constantly look at what we were doing newly. So, parents sometimes are scared to come and talk to the school about the problems that they're having, and thinking that, the school will take it out on somebody, but that's not the way it is. If you come and talk to the school, and then the school can actually fine tune what they're doing and do it better. So, that's what Anita did when I think of.
And she was one of those parents who never spared me. It was my first year in this school, and I remember her getting a B or a B plus. We had that kind of grading, 7-point scale we had. And she came and asked me, Mary ma'am, you've given her a B plus because she can't write. For everything that she did, she questioned me. And I had to explain what was the reason. Because if 5 questions were given, then in class 2, she could manage to copy 3. So if she copied 3, I would say, I'll support you, or somebody will support you to complete the other 2. That was, but for every little thing, the mother questioned.
That's good, because when
so
she
I
asks
really
you,
appreciated.
When she asks you the question, Mary ma'am, have you given her for not being able to write?
She questioned.
Then you realize that, yeah, that's a very silly thing that I'm doing. If she knows the answer, why am I penalizing her for not writing?
So it has been learning all the way, ma'am. So that being the first year, the first thing I did was, build a rapport with your parents.
Yeah.
Build a rapport with your parents. I had Felix Francis, Tanya Sachdeva and Kia Parma. These were my 3 children, first year.
But as parents go, and I'm saying, then another one that I can remember is a parent that we have now, that is children with 2 visually, a parent with 2 visually, Kiran and Ajay. The father, being a BSF constable, is somebody who has pushed his children. I remember when they're very young, he comes early to school, and these visually challenged children are being forced to do the Burma Bridge. And I was saying, well, then I've realized now that why is that child so empowered? Because that father would always push them ahead, push them to do things. He's had a tough life, he'd be coming all the way from Dwarka.
Even the mother, you remember, she used to wait outside. Kiran joined our school in class 1.
Okay.
And the mother used to wait out, and you said, why don't you come and support us rather than sitting outside? That's how she started supporting Hindi for the work we designed for other special children. She did that for 1 year.
Yes. So, these parents have taught us, and so like if you compare these empowered parents with the parents who are not pushing their children, you realize how much a child achieves from a parent that is actually understanding their own children and pushing them accordingly. I'm not talking of parents who just push for the sake of pushing. You have that kind also who are not particularly inspirational. Okay, but these parents have truly been inspirational for them. Of course, I think Mrs. Matthews that you have mentioned as a person is for someone who started a school in a small house as a very young mother of 3 kids, and who FS officer's wife who's sleeping. So coming from the boondocks of Kerala, not much idea of how to do things. She has thought of starting a school, has pushed it, to the point it has, little by little by little. From that I realized that one doesn't have to give up when things don't come one's way immediately. You have to chip away at it a little bit. All that you have to remember is not to give up.
One instance I would like to share of Matthew Ma'am's. I had my class in the corner out here. It was Aparna and Felix Francis, and what she did was, her office used to be down, so she would just walk into any class. She could take the book and flip through it any time. So I was collecting money or something. They were supposed to be taken for a trip somewhere outside within the city. So who was the one who's taking? She had a lot of questions. So I have still not forgotten that incident even today. So the person was somebody from YWCA, Mr. Alex, or somebody who was catering the box for us. So altogether, charging 75. And where are you going? She had little questions for everything. So I said, ma'am, 75. She said, that's a little too much. It was brought down by 10 rupees, but that had meaning, that had value. Because she said, that's too much. And it was grade 2. I'm talking about 1998, ma'am. So that was one that I kept, she could walk. So I share this with most of the teachers here, She could walk into anybody's class, she could, and junior section was here in the lower thing, she could pick up any book. So what have you done? Oh, and if your any letter, as a teacher you have written wrong, she would point out. I remember one Y, capital Y, that I had written was not right. She said, that's not the way you write. So these were little instances were taken in a very positive way, man. That has added to my learning. What are some attributes you look for a young professional wishing to join the education sector? And if there is some advice you would like to put in?
Well, it's a good question in the sense that people come into the field of education. One of the things that we usually ask a teacher at an interview is, what are you reading? I find people want to come into education without reading. I find that very, very interesting, that someone thinks that they can come and work with children and not read. Not expose themselves to any kind of culture. If you're a scientist, do you even read what is happening in the world of science? So if I'm looking for attributes in a teacher, one is that they should be reading, they should be constantly expanding their horizon, and not just in their subject, but in other subjects in another area. That is one. Two is to understand that it's not easy. I mean, no job is easy really if you want to do it well. But if you like something, then you should be willing to stretch yourself. This whole thing of, I work from 8 to 2, I can't work more than that, there's so much of work. Anybody worth their salt will actually be thinking about these things even after school. I don't think it's possible not to think about it. I mean, you have a problematic child in class.
So you reflect, what do I do for tomorrow?
What do I do? I have to make him sit out. He's troubling me. What do I do? How do I change myself to make sure that my class goes with me? How do I prepare myself? So attitudes and reading, I think two very, and thinking. I mean, if you read, you have to think. You can't be reading, not cross-checking and things like that. So critical thinking, reading and the right attitudes, I think, are very important.
Thank you, ma'am. As someone who sees, who's seen you ideate, that's me, implement your vision in situations that range from day-to-day administration to real-life crisis, I would love you to end this conversation with a message, if you have one, for parents, for students, and teachers, and everyone else.
Well, I don't know if the message, what is the message? Now that I've come to my whatever years that I've come to, I find that nothing is as important as relationships. Because whatever you may achieve, if you have, say, no friends at the end of it, you really haven't achieved anything. And so in terms of family and in terms of school and things like that, I mean, it's really sad when you've looked after a child for many years and you find that at the end of those 12 years or 18 years of a child's life, if at the end of it the child hasn't really bonded with you, felt love, what have you actually achieved? You may have got a lot of marks and gone and all. But so like that, my only message is value your time, value your relationships, work at your relationships, work at peace, as they say, breathe slowly, walk peacefully, don't sort of stamp on someone else, and be happy and spread happiness. Work at spreading happiness. I think that's my message at everything.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful interview.
Thank you.